Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be reviewing some of the books that I have read recently from the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction long list. So I have three books to talk to you about today. I have The Heart and Winter by Kevin Barry, which I've got a physical copy of here. And then I also have read recently The Mare by Angrid Hampshire and Mother Naked by Glenn James Brown. So I'm going to be talking about those three books today. So I've now read 5 out of the long list of 12 books. The shortlist is announced very, very soon. I will probably make a video in the next week or two talking about the shortlist and my kind of reading plans going forwards. But I am excited to see what's on the shortlist and whether it is any of the books I've read so far or not. I mean, I really hope Glorious Exploits is on the shortlist. I will be angry if Glorious Exploits is not on the shortlist. But to be honest, everything I have read so far has been quite good, even if some of it less for me than others. So let me start off with the book I have the least to say about in this little trio review, and that is probably The Heart and Winter by Kevin Barry, because this was not necessarily for me, by which I mean I think this was a very good book, but I didn't hugely gel with the writing style. This is probably the most literary of the 5 books I've read from the long list so far, and I always know when I read the Walter Scott Prize long list that they have a really good range of sort of more literary to more accessible historical fiction, and the more literary a book is, sometimes I'm just not going to gel with the writing style, and that's fine. So let me tell you a bit about The Heart and Winter before I talk about my general thoughts and reflections on this. This novel is set in the 1890s in the USA, and we're following a man called Tom Roke, who is an Irish immigrant living in Butte in Montana. He drinks a lot, takes a lot of drugs, has various kind of odd jobs, but isn't really kind of very stable in his life, and he meets early on in the book and falls in love with a woman called Polly, who has very recently got married to another man. And Tom and Polly decide to run away, and we basically follow them as they make their way through the landscape of America in winter, the people that come after them because Tom has run away with a married woman, and everything else that happens to them on the way. So it is in many ways a Western, but it is a very, very literary Western. So there is a lot of drama in this book, and I love the plot. I thought the plot was very pacey, very dramatic, a lot happened, but the writing style is very literary, quite like dreamlike, very light on punctuation. There were a lot of sentences that I had to read like 3 or 4 times before I understood what they meant, and I didn't really gel with the writing style. I suppose for me, I think, as I do sometimes find with more literary fiction, the writing style kind of got in the way of the plot and the characters. And there were moments when I was really invested and I was really interested in seeing what happened to the characters, but so often the writing style would kind of get between me and what was going on in the story. Saying that, I think that is very personal. I think if you like more literary fiction, you will probably love this. I think this is a very good example of what it is. It's just that what it is not necessarily my cup of tea. Saying that, I do think the ending of the book was fantastic, and the way that kind of tied everything together worked very, very well for me. And it's quite a short novel. I read it like over a week, and I feel like if I had read it in one day, I probably would have got a like better experience out of it. Like, I think especially because the writing was kind of taking me a bit of a while to get into, I feel like this is probably one of those books to like try and read in one sitting or in, you know, a short space of time if you can. It was interesting. I remember I had watched Shelley Swearingen's video about the Walter Scott Prize long list when it came out, and I remembered that she had said she really liked The Heart and Winter. So after I had finished reading this book, I went back and watched her video where she spoke about it, and you know, I think it's very telling of taste and subjectivity when it comes to reading, that she mentioned in a video recently that she didn't really get on with Claire, which I absolutely loved. And then I was watching her talk about how much she loved The Heart and Winter, and I just didn't get the same things out of it that she did. But one thing Shelley said, which I thought was really interesting, is how this book had a very like fairy tale quality to it. This sort of almost sense of unreality, and kind of like the villains are really, really tall. I know that sounds like a minor point, but like actually there's a sense of like everything being a bit exaggerated or everything not being quite real, and these 2 people kind of being lost in the woods at some points and things like that do make it kind of feel like a Western fairy tale. And reframing the novel in that sense added a lot to it for me, and I thought that is a really fun way of looking at this book. And is quite an effective and interesting way of looking at this book but I don't think I had that like immediate experience while reading it. That's a slightly rambly way of saying that I don't think this book was for me, but I thought it was quite good. If you are a fan of the more literary end of historical fiction, then this might be one for you. Right, next I want to speak about The Mayor by Angrid Hampshire. This is a really, really interesting historical novel. Very powerful, very grim, very intense. Not an enjoyable read, but a really like valuable one, I suppose. And yeah, I'm really glad that I read this. So The Mayor is set in the mid-20th century, I suppose. Quite a lot of it takes place during the Second World War, but quite a lot of it takes place afterwards. And it is a fictionalized version of the life of a real-life historical figure who was a female concentration camp guard who, after the war, married an American, moved to America, and he had no idea about her past, what she'd done in the war, until a journalist called them up. And the book is about their lives. So we have alternating chapters from Hermione's perspective and Russell's perspectives. And in Hermione's perspective, we're following her from the 1930s through to the end of the Second World War, how she ended up going from working as a servant in Austria to working as a guard in a concentration camp. Then in the other alternating chapters, we are following Russell in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, his meeting Hermione, falling in love with her, their life together in America, and how his life fell apart after her past emerged, and why he stood by her after everything had come out and throughout her criminal trial. And the book is really, really fantastically written, and I think it's written in like just the right way for it to be written. It's a very intense and traumatic novel in many ways, but I didn't find it as intense and traumatic as I was expecting to. I think partly because it's written in very, very short chapters, and we alternate between Hermione and Russell, which I think is a very clever way of telling the story so that it never feels completely overwhelming, which means you are able to digest everything that is being told to you, and you're able to like follow the scenes of Hermione working in a concentration camp without like it being an unbearable thing to read. Like I think it's written in a very clever way, and the chapters are very short. I also read it like over 2 weeks, a few chapters at a time, which I think was quite a good way to read the book. You know, having said The Heart in Winter, I think is a book to read like in one sitting. I think The Mayor is a book to read spread out. And I think the way it's written made this story able to be told. And I think it is a really thematically interesting and powerful and important novel with a lot of interesting things to say. Or maybe it would be better to say like with a lot of important questions posed, I suppose. I'm going to read the epigraph at the front of the book because I think it's really useful in understanding like the main themes of the book. And this epigraph is from a book called Modernity and the Holocaust. The most frightening news brought about by the Holocaust and by what we learned of its perpetrators was not the likelihood that this could be done to us, but the idea that we could do it. And I think a lot of the book is kind of looking at how do a lot of people, and a lot of people who don't consider themselves to be bad people, who consider themselves to be good people, who consider themselves to be ordinary, how do a lot of people end up being complicit in atrocities? And from Russell's perspective, how does someone like Hermione, his wife, who he views as nice and normal and kind, who he sees do small acts of kindness in their lives together, how did someone like her end up complicit in this? And, you know, I think it is quite easy for us to like conceptualize someone as evil as Hitler, if that makes sense. But I think it is harder to conceptualize the people who didn't like think up or plan the terrible things that were done, but were complicit in, and not just complicit in, but like actively part of perpetrating them. And I think what The Mayor does really interestingly and really powerfully is look at like to what extent Hermione is indoctrinated, to what extent she is forced. You know, I think it would have been quite easy to write a book in which Hermione was pressured and forced into working in the concentration camps, and in which this character was more uncomfortable with what she was doing than she is. But actually, like, you are reading about someone who is proud of herself because she thinks she is good at her job. And it's horrific, and that is the point. And I think actually the detachment with which a lot of Hermione's chapters are written is really stark and grim. A lot of the book looks at, you know, where does blame lie, and how do you separate the blame that lies with a government or a state from the blame that lies with individuals. And one thing that I did think was really interesting is that within the sort of sections looking at Hermione's trial, there's a lot pulled out at how women are almost held to like a different standard to men. You know, the point where Hermione's on trial in the sort of 60s, 70s, there is this feeling that women are more innately moral than men, and therefore a woman should have known that this was wrong more than a man should have done. And that theme I thought was really interestingly looked at as well. And I think the way this book looks at like dehumanization, and both the effect that has on people who are being dehumanized, but also the effect that has on people who are doing the dehumanizing and how people get to that point. I think that was really interestingly looked at in The Mayor. And I think that epigraph to the book I read out is quite useful for kind of like summing up the theme of The Mayor, which is, you know, how do ordinary people do evil things? And I thought it was a really thematically fascinating, a really interesting novel. Definitely worth a read. Like I said, it's not like an easy read, but I did find it like, I thought I was going to find it like a tougher read than I did. And I think the way it's written kind of enables Angrid Hampshire to like explore the themes and tell the story that she's telling, without it becoming too overwhelming. Like some parts of it are like really, really horrible, you know that going into it, but I feel like it was written in the correct way for that book to be written, if that makes sense. Okay, I feel like I've spoken about The Mayor for ages, so let me move on to the final book I want to review in this video, which is Mother Naked by Glenn James Brown, which I finished yesterday and really, really enjoyed. So the kind of conceit behind Mother Naked is that all of the text in the novel is sort of spoken aloud. So Mother Naked is a bard, entertainer, a gleeman, that's the word he uses. And in 1434, he goes to Durham Cathedral, and he is reciting a story, telling a story to the assembled gentlemen, the sort of wealthier people of the area, who were all in Durham Cathedral for the evening, and he tells them a story. So we have sort of various strands within Mother Naked. We have the kind of present moment, 1434, and the interactions that Mother Naked has with the men in the cathedral, because he sometimes addresses them directly, sometimes they talk back to him. We only get the words that he says, not the words that they say, but we have a sense of dialogue between them. And he kind of comments on events going on in the cathedral at the time. But then we also have the story he is telling, which is chiefly the story of a village 40 years ago. We know that something terrible happened that ended in tragedy, that a lot of people within the village died, and that there were these rumours, these myths of a ghost. And Mother Naked kind of tells the story of what happened all these years ago, kind of focusing specifically on one family, and how they were kind of driven further and further into desperation and poverty by the treatment they got from other people living in the village. But then woven throughout this tale, Mother Naked also goes on lots of tangents, and a lot of the tangents feature his friend and fellow gleeman Pearl Eye. So we also kind of get the story of his friendship with Pearl Eye throughout this narrative too. And there was so much that I loved about Mother Naked. I thought it was so clever, and so well done. It's one of those books where its brilliance creeps up on you quietly. Like, I feel like for the first half of the book I was like, this is really good, I'm really enjoying this, great story, and then the closer we got to the end, the more I was like, oh I see. And it was just like, it was really, really good. It was brilliant. The ending was so well done, and I just really loved like how the story unfolded and the way the different narratives kind of wove together. All of that just worked really well. I also thought it was thematically really, really interesting. Like, a lot of it is about poverty and class and injustice, and unfairness, and kind of how this one family 40 years ago, in the late 14th century, are just treated so badly by so many people, and there are so many small injustices done to them, and those small injustices build up and up and up and lead to complete tragedy. So the kind of main family of the story within a story, they are villeins, which is kind of like a form of serfdom. So that means they were like legally bound to the local landlord. They had to work the local landowner's property as well as their own land, and they weren't allowed to leave that land. And the unfairness of this system and how right this system was for corruption is definitely like part of the story. But although that is obviously like a very historically specific part of the story, like the way that feeds into broader themes of social unfairness, social discrimination, poverty and class structures, and how unfair class structures are. Like, I thought all of that was really, really well done and very powerful. And also the theme of music, and kind of stories and performance, and how music can provide hope. I thought all of that was done well. The themes of family and grief were done really well. You kind of learn throughout the story like why Mother Naked and Pearl Eye have their unusual names, and kind of that sense of like naming yourself and claiming an identity for yourself in a world that has like stripped you of identity because of your poverty and position within the social structure. Like, all of that was really, really interesting, and I just thought there was a lot in it that was great. It was one of those books where, like, for the first half I was like, this is really good, really enjoying this, not sure I understand yet why it's on the Walter Scott Prize long list. Then the further we got through the book, I was like, oh yes, this is excellent. So yeah, I really, really liked Mother Naked. I would really, really recommend it. Sadly, there isn't an audiobook, which I think is a real shame, because it is a novel that is in its form meant to be spoken aloud, and I feel like it would be excellent on audiobook with a good narrator. So I hope they do make an audiobook sometime. Maybe they will. It's from a smaller press, but it has been longlisted for a few prizes, so maybe someone will get the audio rights, because I think it would make a wonderful audiobook. It was still an excellent joy to read on the page. I read this on ebook, as I did with The Mayor, but I kind of feel like I would love to reread this on audiobook if an audiobook ever gets made, because it would be great. So yes, highly recommend Mother Naked. It was really, really good. So there we go. So I have read so far 5 books from the Walter Scott Prize long list. The 3 I spoke about today, and also Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon and Clear by Karis Davis. I'm pretty sure I said Davies when I should have said Davis in a previous video, but anyway. So I've read, 5 of the 12 books on the long list. The shortlist is usually 6 books. I think sometimes it's fewer than 6 books. In fact, I feel like it's been anywhere from like 5 to 7. Yeah, so who knows how long or short the shortlist will be when it is announced in the next couple of days. It'll be also interesting to see which of the books I've read so far are on it, if any. I feel like some of the books that I think are most likely to make the shortlist, well, thinking specifically of The Safe Keep, I haven't read that yet, and I think that is quite likely to be on the shortlist, though who knows. I'm waiting for the audiobook hold from my library for that, and it's going to be a while, so we'll see. I may just have to give in and buy the audiobook if it's on the shortlist, but we'll see. There are still quite a few that I'm really keen to read, like whether or not they make the shortlist, so I definitely want to get my hands on A Sign of Her Own and The Land in Winter, that I also have on hold at the library that hasn't come in yet. Those 2 are probably the 2 I'm most keen to read that I haven't read yet. Oh, and The First Friend by Malcolm Knox. I'm really keen to read that one as well, because that sounded really interesting. We will see what makes it onto the shortlist. I very much hope that Glorious Exploits makes it onto the shortlist. I would also be very pleased to see Clear on the shortlist, and Mother Naked, and The Mayor, to be honest, as well. I wouldn't be hugely surprised, actually, if The Heart in Winter makes it onto the shortlist, even though it's not necessarily my style. I do think it did what it was doing well, and Kevin Barry is a very well-respected writer, and I know a lot of other people have loved it, so it may be that that makes it onto the shortlist. We will see. My favourite to win is still Glorious Exploits, because I just think it's one of the best books I've read ever. So that is all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you've read anything else from the Walter Scott Prize long list so far. Do you have any shortlist predictions? That is all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.